Mr. President, Dr. Bunce, messengers, and guests, thank you for the opportunity of joining you on this occasion. My wife and our daughter are here today to celebrate with us. It's a wonderful thing to come to Clovis. When Dale Howard retired from the Highland Baptist Church, they asked us to come as interim, and we were there for many months until they called Dick Ross as pastor. During that time, we made some very special friends at Highland Baptist Church, and I believe I see some here in the congregation today. I've been keeping up with Clovis because of the building of North America's largest cheddar cheese plant here. We drove over here several times during construction to see what was happening. And we did so in the hope that we'd be able to tour the facility when they finished. My daughter and I drove out there early this morning as people were entering the grounds to begin a day of work. But we could not be allowed to enter. They tell us that since 9/11, it's not easy to monitor places such as that. You've always been blessed with Cannon Air Force Base, and now it's larger than ever. You are known because of Cannon. Wayne and Lillian Higgs communicated with us from time to time, and they would send us articles from the Clovis paper. And one of those articles describing Southwest Cheese Corporation said that there are 150,000 dairy cattle in eastern New Mexico and western Texas that are helping furnish milk for that factory. I think that every one of those 150,000 cattle would say, "Eat more chicken." The April 21, 2012 issue of the Baptist New Mexican carried a compelling article by Executive Director Joe Bunce entitled "Cooperative Program Shines Like Stars in the Sky." Joe had been on a mission trip to Saipan, and as he was leaving the island, the missionary pastor handed him a check, and he said, "Here is our cooperative program giving for the last 3 months." Your executive director was moved to tears, and he responded, "The cooperative program is at work like the lights of the heavens, even when you are unaware." I wrote Dr. Bunce how much we appreciated that article and another article that he wrote about the history of this convention. My assignment today is to tell you how it was. And so the ushers are giving you a sheet, and on that sheet you will see the names of Baptist Building and Home Mission Board staff members in the Baptist Building that were serving in 1984, our last year here. In a few days, I will be 88 years of age. I am nearly as old as this convention. 72 years ago, I answered God's call to the ministry, and beginning with the very first church where we served in Big Spring, Texas, we put the emphasis on mission giving through the cooperative program. Coming to the Baptist Convention of New Mexico on January the 1st, 1975, all of us together established 3 goals. We wanted to reach the state for Christ. We wanted to increase cooperative program giving every year, and we wanted to increase our percentage of cooperation with the Home Mission Board in financing work here in the state. We were able to accomplish at least 2 of those goals, and I suppose the evangelism goal is an ongoing one until Jesus comes again. The Baptist Convention of New Mexico opened for business in 1912. The first official business meeting was in Clovis, and I noticed as I checked the records that at least once every decade the convention has come to Clovis for its meeting. The first executive secretary was Dr. E.B. Atwood. He served in this capacity for 6 years. He was our Bible teacher at Hardin-Simmons University. Prof. Ribble was a professor of economics at Hardin-Simmons, and he later came to our convention, to the Baptist Foundation and Church Loan Division. Dr. Stagg, who had the longest tenure of any official, any executive officer in the various states, preached for the University of Hardin-Simmons in a revival. And in that revival, there were remarkable conversions. He made such an impact on that school. They conferred a doctor's degree upon him in recognition of his service to the Southern Baptist Convention and also to New Mexico Baptists. Dr. Stagg was in World War I. He was gassed, and when he came home to Louisiana, they thought that he would die. But one doctor said, if you'll go out west to New Mexico, to that arid climate, perhaps you will recover. And he did. He went to Gallup. Some of the time, he had to be carried from his bed to preach on Sunday. But during the time of therapy, he became stronger. He began to make a mark on this state, and you called him to be your executive director for 30 years. When we served here from 75 till 85, it was our high privilege to have Dr. R.Y. Bradford and Dr. Stagg as our frequent guests in the Baptist building and also in our home. They were 2 of our strongest supporters. When you elected me at Glorietta in 1974 to come, C.L. Bowe was elected president of this convention. And for my first 2 years, my buddy, C.L., was a source of support. In 1985, Claude Cohn became our executive director for 20 years, and now he continues as pastor of one of Albuquerque's fine churches. Joe, Claude, and I have been standing on the strong shoulders of good men like these who preceded us, and it is our prayer that we may be faithful as they were. I'm sure you've watched Texas A&M play football on television, and that cadet corps sits on one side of the stadium, and there is a big streamer over the cadet corps. It says, "Home of the 12th man." That means that those supporters contribute to the success of the team. Our staff in the Baptist building and out in the field numbered more than 100 in the year 1984. We were like family. We worked together. We prayed together. We supported each other in every way possible. And some of them have passed on, like Dr. Gene Whitlow and Ed Storm. But some are still with us and here for this meeting today. I salute them and embrace them. One of my dearest friends in the Baptist building was a man little known. We went to Tucumcari in 1954 and served there for 4 years. While we were in Tucumcari, many of the leaders in the city were members of that church. Ben Munoz from First National Bank, Mr. Ingram from Citizens National Bank, Frank Baum, who had the GMC dealership, and many others. There was one fellow named Delmer Lee that owned the office supply. He was a member of our church, and his wife. But he had a man who worked in the back of the office supply in the print shop. He did all of the classic printing for us and for other institutions in the city. I lost track of that man until we moved to the Baptist Convention on January 1, 1975. A Spanish man named Juan Martinez. The reason you didn't know him was because Juan worked over the presses and he delivered to you the Baptist New Mexican each week. I remember how he would prepare it and then he would take it to the post office and get it in the mail so you would have it. When we went to Tucumcari, we were fortunate that our Little League baseball team won the championship for the state of New Mexico. That was up at Los Alamos when that was a controlled facility. We won that on the arm of a young left-handed boy. He pitched us all the way to San Francisco, and we were in the last game at San Francisco before going to Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And in that last game, this young left-handed pitcher ran out of innings. Little League rules demand that these young boys can only play so many innings. We were ahead 1 run. We were at the end of the game. They had to pull him. We lost that game by 1 run. That was the little brother of Juan Martinez. I pay tribute to Juan today. He was a quiet man. He was a gentle man. He was a humble man. He never asked for any recognition, but he did his job thoroughly. Ted Roberts and I office side by side. We traveled together, we conducted revivals together, and we slid on the ice together all the way to Bloomfield and Farmington. Don Brent worked in the field with multiple dozens of missionaries. Chief Lawson preached revivals all over the state. Let me say in brief, whatever has been accomplished the past century and whatever will be accomplished until Christ returns is by the grace of God. Amen. Only God can bring something out of nothing. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. So we say with the Apostle Paul, I am determined to know nothing among you save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Walk with me down the trail of grace. Paul, in his farewell message at Miletus, said the ministry we have received is to testify to the grace of God. He commended his believers to God and to the word of His grace, which is able to build you up and to give you an inheritance. When he wrote to the Romans, he said, we are justified freely by His grace. To the Ephesians, he said, by grace ye are saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. Somehow, as I read the New Testament, I find Paul's letter to Titus, a climax of his writing about God's grace. The grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lusts, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world, looking for that blessed hope and the glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. In the brief compass of those 3 verses, he details the entire Christian life. It is one of grace. It is one of godliness. It is one of glory. It starts with grace, God's undeserved favor, and we call it conversion or justification. It continues with godliness, and we call it growth or sanctification. It concludes with glory, and we call that the second coming, glorification. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. John Newton, the slave trader, was arrested by a vicious storm, and he turned his thoughts toward Christ the Savior. He wrote this ageless song. We've been to Ireland and Britain 10 times. We've gone to many musical performances, and I think we've never attended one but that they sang Amazing Grace. John Newton became the pastor of the church in Olney, England. And on one of those trips, we went to Olney to see where he had ministered. William Cowper, the songwriter, was also a member of that church. But Cowper was given to deep periods of depression, and some historians say that he attempted on 2 or 3 occasions to take his life. John Newton said, William, I want you to write a hymn for every Sunday service. And you know, when Cowper did that, it lifted him out of the ditch of despondency. And the 2 of them published the Olney Hymnal, which became a blessing to thousands of people. God's grace is saving grace. By grace we are saved through faith, and that not of ourselves. The grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. In February 1966, we had an all-day evangelism conference at First Baptist Church, Amarillo. We were getting ready for a big stadium crusade. Dick Bivens Stadium. Dr. W.A. Criswell would be the preacher. Dr. C. Wade Freeman would assist us in that revival. So in this evangelism conference, on this big day, we had testimonies. In the morning, we had a testimony from Tommy Phelps, a professional wrestler. He told how deep he had gone into sin. He told how his barber prayed for his salvation and how members of the Trinity Baptist Church asked God to save him. He was brought to his knees, confessed his sin, and became a preacher. Later that same morning, we heard Mark Davis. He owned a big carpet company in Amarillo. He was highly respected, very successful. But when he gave his testimony, he told how his pastor, Carlos McLeod, had led him to the Lord. And he in turn led his brother Bill to Christ. In the afternoon, a young man named David Cunningham from Pleasant Valley Baptist Church was directing the music. When David got up, he said, "I know you haven't asked me to say anything, but I've been inspired by the testimony of Tommy Phelps and the testimony of Mark Davis. But I want to tell you, I was brought up in a Christian home, and my dad and mother prayed for my salvation. And when they saw that I was under conviction, they led me to Christ. I just want you to know you don't have to go out and do all the bad things to be saved." We went away from that evangelism conference saying that God can save anybody. He can save the old. He can save the young. He can save those who have gone deep in sin and those who have only known the church and the Sunday school and the Bible and give their hearts to Christ. My wife's father was L.D. Ball. Some of you know L.D. Ball. He was in Tucumcari, New Mexico. My wife was about 6, 7, and 8 years old. Her little sister Kathleen, 3 or 4 years younger. L.D. Ball had helped lay the pipelines into Vernon, Texas, 1927, May the 21st. As they brought the gas into Vernon, on that day, my wife was born in a duplex in Vernon. That's the same day that Lindbergh landed in Paris. L.D. Ball was not a Christian. He went to Corpus Christi and helped lay the gas lines into Corpus Christi. And then he came to Tucumcari to run a service station and manage a motel for Mr. Golden. You know, the folks were praying for him. Ms. Ball was a devout Christian. Her father had been a Baptist preacher. And as the church agonized for the salvation of L.D. Ball, Ollie Dennis, you know Ollie Dennis? He was preaching a revival. And on the last night of that revival, L.D. Ball was so under conviction, Ben Munoz, the banker, knelt with him and prayed him through to salvation. About a year later, God called him to preach, and he went to Howard Payne, took his 2 little daughters with him, scrounging to make enough living to keep the family afloat. He finished Southwestern Seminary, served in some significant pastorates, and was called as Director of Evangelism for the state of New Mexico. God's grace is saving grace. But God's grace is serving grace. D.L. Moody said one time there were 3 red-letter days in his life: the day of his conversion, the day he confessed Christ, and the day he led others to Christ. When I was 17 years of age, pastor of the Northside Church in Big Spring, Texas, O.C. Curtis invited me to preach a revival in the First Baptist Church of Perryton. An old Jewish singer named Johnny Cohen led the music. The whole week was like heaven on earth. And I'll tell you why. That little bald-headed preacher had witnessed to store owners up and down Main Street. He had gone to the ranches and witnessed to the ranchers, and the scene was set for revival. And this was the treasure at the end of the rainbow. Who was O.C. Curtis? He was a barber in Big Spring, a successful barber, but he was a gambler. He kept a room available in the hotel, and he could take people from the barber shop and clean them out. They gambled. One day, his little son, Billy, and his wife, Lottie B. Curtis, they went to the Tabernacle Baptist Church, and they said, "Daddy, go with us to church tonight." And he did. And when the invitation was given, little Billy, who became my roommate at Hardin-Simmons University, went over to his daddy and he said, "Daddy, when they sing 'Just as I Am,' won't you go forward?" That night, his daddy was saved. He was called to preach. He went to Andrews. He pastored the church at Seminole. He pastored Perryton. And later he pastored in Pampa. God's grace is serving grace. The decades of the 1970s and 80s at the convention offices in Albuquerque, Eleanor Whitehill and Hazel Morrow were my secretaries. One day, Eleanor came into the office and said, "There's a family parked out here on the east parking lot, and they have all of their belongings in a trailer. Would you visit with them?" It was Paul and Sally Klopfer, natives of New Mexico, who had gone up to the Midwest to start church, and they were successful. But one day God said, "Paul, I want you to go back home." And he came home. There they were on the parking lot. They didn't know what they would do. I called Don Brent. "Don, is there anything out in the mission field?" He said, "The pastor at Tohatchee has just moved." Said, "Paul, would you pray about going to Tohatchee?" They had children. That was a big move, to take your children and move to Tohatchee. That's a far distance from any place. I went out there once to preach on a Sunday, and I walk early every morning, and I went out walking before daylight Sunday morning, and you can hear a car motor 5 miles away humming as it comes down. But you know, Paul took the bus out on the reservation, and he hauled those children in, and they accepted Christ. The biggest revival that had ever taken place on the reservation was taking place under Paul's leadership, and Sally, his wife, was discipling all those people. God's grace is serving grace. On our trips to southern England and Ireland, we always go through Bristol, and we go to the old Baptist college in Bristol, where they have one of the original Tyndale Bibles kept under lock and key. It was in Bristol that George Muller, the German, came to start an orphanage, and by faith, without any solicitation of money, he ran that orphanage year after year after year. God sends His manna a day at a time, and when the times press upon us, we can come boldly to the throne of grace and find help in the time of need. God's grace is suffering grace. In the Baptist building, we used to have a devotion every day, and when we'd have a devotion, we would bring requests for prayer. We would call the names of missionaries. And we finished devotion one day, and I went to the office, and Charles Polston followed me in there and said, "Brother Chester, I tried to call Jeanette at the house. I think she's working out with the flowers today, and I could not reach her. I'm worried." He went out there and found that she had had a heart attack and had died. Very soon after that, the doctor said, "Charles, you've got to have heart surgery." Presbyterian Hospital. It was going to be on Monday morning. Bonnie and I were in this church on Sunday for services. Not only Sunday morning services, but an afternoon event. And we were trying to get back to Presbyterian Hospital before the doors were locked on Sunday night. We barely made it. We didn't know what we'd find. We went to Charles' room, and he was sitting on the side of a bed, and he had his New Testament, and he said, "See what I have found." In Hebrews 13, God said, "I will never leave you or forsake you." So we may boldly say, "The Lord is my helper." Charles proved to me that it's suffering grace. I have a special Bible in my hand right here. In 1983, Bonnie and I were going to Las Cruces for this convention. And as we pulled out of the driveway, we received calls from Fort Worth, Texas, that my father was dying. Well, instead of taking Bonnie to Las Cruces, I dropped her off at the airport in Albuquerque, and she went to take care of my father. I thought, well, if I can get through 2 days at Las Cruces, then I can drive to Fort Worth, a long drive. I just happened to pass by the bookstore display at Las Cruces, and I saw this New American Standard Bible recently published. And I casually said to whoever was standing next to me, "You know, I'm going to buy that Bible when I get back from Dad's place." When I got back, the Bible was on my desk, and it said in the front of the Bible, "To Chester O'Brien from Friends, Thanksgiving 1983, Baptist Convention of New Mexico, Jim Goodner, Jerry Haley, Lee Back, Jack Strickland, Josie Flores, Dwayne Morrow, Marvin Capehart, J.C. Tankersley, Aquila Brown, Betty Wilson, Ken Stoner, Michael Dean, Milford Meisner, J.B. Fowler, Lawrence Bowley, Chief Lawson, W.A. Bradshaw, Henry Servat." My father died, but I had the assurance that God was taking care of him, and He would take care of us, because the same grace that saves us and helps us serve and enables us to suffer triumphantly is also the grace that is with us in the hour of death. God bless you.